My name is Sophia Turner, and I'm a 27-year-old digital marketing specialist who spends weekends immersed in the vibrant world of painting. For as long as I can remember, art has been my sanctuary, a place where colors and imagination collide, offering me peace and inspiration. Little did I know, life was about to shift dramatically when I met Ethan Carter. Ethan, a 32-year-old financial analyst, swept me off my feet with his spontaneous nature and contagious laughter. Our whirlwind romance began on a crisp autumn evening when we bumped into each other at a local cafe. What started as a casual conversation over coffee quickly blossomed into something deeper. Within months, I found myself daydreaming about our future, and before I knew it, Ethan proposed during a sunset picnic in the park. A year later, we exchanged vows in a cozy ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Ethan and I couldn't have been more different. He lived for the thrill of the moment, while I thrived on structure and careful planning. Despite our contrasting personalities, or perhaps because of them, we complemented each other beautifully. He brought excitement into my meticulously organized world, while I provided him with stability and clarity. Together, we seemed unstoppable, as if we had discovered the perfect balance between chaos and order. Our love story felt like a modern-day fairy tale, but as we embarked on the journey of marriage, I began to realize that life's challenges could test even the strongest bonds. Little did I know, the months ahead would reveal cracks in our seemingly perfect foundation, cracks I couldn't ignore. The day after our wedding, the house still buzzed with the warmth of celebration. Brightly wrapped gifts and heartfelt cards covered every surface, turning our living room into a chaotic yet beautiful reminder of the previous night's joy. As I sipped my coffee, savoring the calm, the doorbell rang. It was Ethan's parents, Linda and Greg Carter. Their unexpected visit was surprising but not entirely unwelcome. I hadn't spent much time with them before the wedding, so I saw this as an opportunity to build a stronger connection. Linda, dressed impeccably as always, surveyed the room, her sharp eyes immediately drawn to the pile of gifts. "Looks like Santa came early," she remarked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Greg chuckled, patting Ethan on the back. "You two really cleaned up, didn't you?" I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. Ethan seemed unbothered, busy unwrapping a set of sleek kitchen tools from his cousin. Meanwhile, Linda's attention had shifted to a stunning crystal vase from my Aunt Karen. She picked it up delicately, turning it in her hands. "Now, this is exquisite," she mused. "It would look perfect on my dining room table." I blinked, caught off guard. "Actually, I was thinking of placing it in our foyer," I said, my voice even. Linda's smile faltered for a brief moment before she replied, "Oh, but you'll barely notice it here. It'll get so much more use at our place." Greg chimed in with a laugh. "It's not like you'll miss it, right?" I glanced at Ethan, silently pleading for his support. He merely chuckled and said, "Mom, it's our wedding gift. You've got plenty of vases." His tone was light, treating the situation as nothing more than a harmless joke. Linda raised an eyebrow and placed the vase back on the table, her expression tinged with disapproval. "Patricia, dear, you'll learn to share in time. Family is about helping each other, after all," she said, her tone patronizing. The unease in my chest grew as they continued to casually claim other gifts, admiring a set of fine china, and even commenting on a luxurious throw blanket. I felt as though the pieces of our new life together were slowly being chipped away, and Ethan's nonchalant attitude only deepened my discomfort. By the time they left, I was emotionally drained. Ethan, however, seemed oblivious to my growing frustration. "They didn't mean anything by it," he said, shrugging as he unwrapped another gift. But to me, it was more than just a misunderstanding. It was the first crack in the image of our perfect life, a subtle reminder that Ethan and I might not be on the same page when it came to setting boundaries. As I began tidying up the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that my new life was already being invaded, and I silently resolved to stay vigilant, hoping it was just a one-time incident. But deep down, I feared this was only the beginning. Our first wedding anniversary was a milestone I wanted to celebrate in style. I planned a special dinner at Lomore, a quaint little restaurant Ethan and I adored for its intimate ambience and delicious cuisine. It felt like the perfect place to mark the occasion and also an opportunity to strengthen bonds with his parents, Linda and Greg. I hoped the evening would be a harmonious blend of love and family connection. When we arrived, Linda and Greg were already seated, browsing the menu. Linda greeted us with a bright smile, her eyes scanning the elegant decor. "This place is charming," she said, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the table. Greg nodded in agreement. "Definitely upscale." "Good choice, Patricia," he added with a wink. As the server handed us our menus, I discreetly reached for Ethan's hand under the table. He gave mine a reassuring squeeze, silently appreciating the effort I had put into organizing the evening. I ordered the salmon, Ethan's favorite, hoping to create a warm, celebratory atmosphere. But as the evening unfolded, the tension slowly crept in. Linda skimmed the menu, her eyes landing on the most extravagant items. "We'll have the lobster and filet mignon," she declared, barely glancing at the server. "And let's not forget a bottle of your finest red wine," Greg added with a cheeky grin. My smile tightened as I attempted to keep the mood light. "Quite the celebration, huh?" I remarked, though the unease in my voice was barely concealed. Ethan simply shrugged. "It's a special night. Let's enjoy it." Throughout the meal, Linda and Greg savored each bite as though it were a royal feast, completely oblivious to the hefty bill their choices would rack up. I focused on my plate, trying to push down the growing frustration. This was supposed to be a celebration of our love, yet I felt like a supporting player in a show starring Ethan's parents. When the check arrived, Ethan's expression briefly betrayed his surprise at the total, but he quickly composed himself and handed over his card. I watched him, my heart sinking. I had hoped he might address the extravagance, but instead, he simply signed the receipt without a word. As we left the restaurant, Linda looped her arm through mine, her voice brimming with contentment. "Patricia, this was just lovely. We'll have to do it again next year," she said, as if it were already decided. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt undervalued and invisible. This was supposed to be about us, our love, our journey, but instead, it had become another stage for Linda and Greg to steal the spotlight. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of resentment building within me. Ethan's inability to set boundaries with his parents was becoming more apparent, and I began to wonder how much longer I could continue biting my tongue. The holiday season had always been my favorite time of year. Thanksgiving marked the beginning of a stretch filled with warmth, festive decorations, and shared traditions. Ethan and I had spent the week blending autumn hues with early Christmas cheer, turning our home into a cozy haven. One evening, as we strung lights around the living room, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message. He chuckled as he read it, then handed the phone to me. "My parents are ahead of the game," he said with a smirk. "They've already sent over their Christmas wish list." Curious, I scrolled through the message, my eyebrows shooting up in disbelief. The list wasn't just a simple set of holiday wishes. It was a detailed inventory of high-end electronics, designer clothes, and other luxury goods. Each item seemed more extravagant than the last, as if plucked from a catalog meant for the ultra-wealthy. "They can't be serious," I murmured, handing the phone back to Ethan. He shrugged, seemingly unbothered. "They like the good stuff. What can I say?" The knot in my stomach tightened. It wasn't just about the gifts, it was the expectation behind them. The unspoken pressure to meet their lavish standards loomed over me like a storm cloud. While I had already planned thoughtful gifts for Ethan's parents, their list made me feel as though my efforts would never measure up. As Christmas approached, I decided to stick with something practical yet elegant: a high-quality coffee maker. I hoped it would strike a balance between thoughtful and reasonable. On Christmas morning, I handed Linda and Greg the neatly wrapped box, my heart hopeful for a positive reaction. Linda unwrapped the gift with a polite smile. "Oh, how nice," she said, setting it aside without much interest. Moments later, she handed me a small package in return, a set of scented candles. The candles were lovely, but the imbalance was glaring. I glanced over at Ethan, who was admiring a sophisticated drone they had gifted him. He seemed genuinely pleased, completely oblivious to the disparity between their gifts for us. Later that evening, as we tidied up the living room, Ethan noticed my silence. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I replied, though my heart felt heavy. Bringing up the imbalance would only create tension, and I didn't want to dampen the holiday spirit. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of being undervalued. While I had given generously, the return gifts felt like afterthoughts. It was as if my efforts to build a connection with Ethan's parents were being met with indifference. As I sat by the fireplace that night, the flickering flames reflected my growing frustration. The holidays, once a time of joy and connection, now felt like another reminder of the unspoken hierarchy within our family dynamic. When I received an unexpected quarterly bonus at work, I immediately thought of surprising Ethan with something special. Life had felt heavy with the unspoken tensions between us, and I wanted to rekindle the spark that once defined our relationship. A romantic getaway to Venice, the city of love, seemed like the perfect way to escape and reconnect. That evening, over a quiet dinner, I revealed my surprise. "Ethan," I began, unable to hide my excitement, "I booked us a trip to Venice. Just you and me, exploring the canals and soaking in the beauty of the city we've always dreamed of visiting." His face lit up, the joy in his eyes reigniting a part of him I hadn't seen in months. "Venice? Really? That's incredible, Sophia," he exclaimed, pulling me into a tight embrace. For a brief moment, I felt like we were back to being the carefree couple we once were. But that joy was short-lived. The next evening, Ethan's phone rang. It was his mother, Linda. I overheard him sharing our plans, his excitement bubbling over. "We're going to Venice. Can you believe it?" I froze, silently willing him to keep the conversation brief, but my hopes were dashed when his tone shifted. "I know, Mom. You've always wanted to go," he said, his enthusiasm giving way to a more subdued tone. When he ended the call, he turned to me, his face clouded with uncertainty. "They want to come with us," he said hesitantly, as though seeking my approval. "To Venice? With us?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. He nodded, trying to justify their request. "They've never been, and they're getting older. I feel bad, Sophia. They've done so much for me." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my composure. "This trip was supposed to be for us, Ethan. Just us. I've been looking forward to spending time together without distractions. They won't understand if we say no," he said, his tone almost pleading. I took a deep breath, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "They've had their time, Ethan. This is about us now. My bonus paid for this trip, and I want it to be for us as we planned." Ethan hesitated, but eventually nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to them," he said, though his resolve seemed shaky at best. However, that conversation never happened. Days later, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with a series of bank notifications. My heart raced as I opened them, each transaction hitting me like a blow. Airline tickets, hotel bookings, and other charges, all for Venice. The timestamps revealed the most devastating truth. The flight had already departed. Ethan and his parents were on their way to Venice, and he had used my bonus to fund the trip without my knowledge or consent. My hands trembled as I processed the betrayal. The man I had trusted, the man I had built a life with, had taken what was meant for us and given it away. I dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. My voice cracked as I left a message. "Ethan, I saw the charges. You took your parents to Venice using my money. I don't even know what to say. I hope it was worth it." The house felt colder and emptier than ever after that call. I sat at the kitchen table, replaying the events in my mind, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. I realized I could no longer ignore the pattern, the imbalance, the disregard for my feelings, the constant sacrifices I was expected to make. With a heavy heart, I logged into my accounts and began canceling the hotel rooms, the return flights, and any remaining trip expenses tied to my finances. Each cancellation felt like severing a thread that had once bound us together. The next step was clear. I contacted the bank and removed Ethan's access to my accounts. The trust one had once placed in him was irreparably broken, and I knew I needed to protect myself moving forward. That evening, I packed a suitcase, leaving behind the life we had built. As I placed my wedding ring on the counter, its cold metal glinting in the dim light, I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but it was the one I needed. When Ethan returned from Venice, I was waiting for him. The moment he stepped through the door, I could see the unease in his eyes. He set down his bags, his attempt at a smile faltering under my cold gaze. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my voice steady but sharp. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sophia, I know you're upset, but I couldn't say no to them. They've always wanted to go, and you thought it was fine to use my money, without even asking?" I interrupted, my frustration spilling over. "This wasn't just about the trip, Ethan. It was about us. I wanted to spend time together, to reconnect. They're my parents," he said defensively. "They've done so much for me. I didn't want to disappoint them." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. "Does my happiness matter at all? Or am I just supposed to keep sacrificing while they take whatever they want?" Ethan looked away, his silence speaking volumes. The chasm between us felt insurmountable, and I realized that this wasn't just about the trip. It was about years of unspoken frustrations, unbalanced priorities, and a lack of boundaries. The following days were a blur of cold silence and awkward exchanges. Our once lively home became a place of strained coexistence, where even small talk felt forced. I tried to hold on, hoping for a sign that Ethan understood the gravity of his actions, but it never came. One evening, as I sat alone in our dimly lit living room, the weight of everything crashed down on me. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly feeling undervalued and overlooked. It was time to take control of my life. The next morning, I visited the bank to sever our financial ties. The manager, a kind woman in her 40s, helped me remove Ethan's access to my accounts. "Let's make sure you're fully protected," she said, her reassuring tone providing a small sense of relief. With my finances secured, I packed my bags and drove to my sister Isabella's house. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a warm embrace. "Sophia, I've been so worried," she said, her concern evident. As we sat in her kitchen, I recounted everything. Venice, the betrayal, the growing distance between Ethan and me. Isabella listened intently, her expression shifting between disbelief and anger. "You deserve so much better," she said firmly, her hand squeezing mine. "I know," I replied, my voice resolute. "That's why I'm filing for divorce. I can't stay married to someone who has so little respect for me." Over the next few days, Isabella helped me settle in and plan my next steps. Each small act of rebuilding, organizing my belongings, researching divorce lawyers, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. As I stood by Isabella's window one evening, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I felt a sense of hope for the first time in weeks. My life was no longer tied to someone who took me for granted. It was mine to rebuild, and I was ready to start over. A few days after I moved into Isabella's house, an unexpected knock on the door shattered the calm. I opened it to find Linda and Greg, their faces tight with anger. Without waiting for an invitation, they barged in, their presence filling the room with tension. "You've got some nerve, Sophia," Linda spat, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Ruining our family vacation like that, canceling everything behind our backs. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for us?" I stood frozen, my heart pounding, but before I could respond, Isabella stepped forward, her protective stance firm. "That's enough," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "You're not going to come into my house and disrespect my sister," Greg scoffed. "We're just here to talk some sense into her. She's being selfish, tearing apart the family over something so trivial." "Trivial?" Isabella snapped, her eyes blazing. "Taking someone's hard-earned money without consent isn't trivial. Disregarding Sophia's feelings isn't trivial. You two have done nothing but take advantage of her kindness, and it ends now. Linda's face turned red, but she didn't back down. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice dripping with indignation. It is over, Isabella countered, pointing toward the door. Leave now, or I'll call the police. The confrontation left the air thick with tension, but as Linda and Greg stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. Isabella turned to me, her expression softening. You did the right thing, she said gently. In that moment, I knew she was right. The confrontation solidified my resolve. There was no going back. It was time to move on, leaving behind the toxic ties that had weighed me down for far too long. Finalizing the divorce felt like crossing the finish line of an exhausting marathon. As I walked out of the courthouse, the cool breeze carried a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and, most prominently, a sense of liberation. The chapter with Ethan, once full of love and promise, was now closed. But with that closure came the chance to rebuild, to reclaim my life on my own terms. My first step toward independence was moving into a small, sunlit apartment in the heart of the city. Though modest, it felt like a blank canvas waiting to be transformed. I filled the space with plants, hung my paintings on the walls, and carefully selected furniture that reflected my taste, a blend of modern simplicity and cozy charm. Each piece I placed felt like staking a claim to my newfound freedom. With my surroundings taking shape, I turned my focus inward, rediscovering the passions I had neglected. Painting once again became my therapy, and I found solace in the soothing rhythm of brushstrokes on canvas. But more than that, I felt an urge to share my journey, to connect with others who might be navigating their own challenges. That's when I started my blog, Reclaiming Sophia. Through my blog, I poured my heart out, sharing stories of heartbreak, healing, and growth. I wrote about the small victories, decorating my first home, finding joy in simple routines, and embracing the beauty of solitude. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from readers who shared their own stories, offering words of encouragement and gratitude for my honesty. As the weeks turned into months, my blog blossomed into a community. Strangers became friends, and their support made me feel less alone. In turn, I found purpose in lifting others up, reminding them that life after loss wasn't just possible, it could be beautiful. One particularly crisp autumn morning, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, the city's hum serving as a comforting backdrop. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt at peace. I had carved out a life that was entirely my own, free from the weight of others' expectations. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but I felt ready to face whatever came my way. The strength I had discovered in myself was something no one could take away. As I closed my laptop after publishing another blog post, I smiled, realizing how far I had come. My journey wasn't just about moving on. It was about rediscovering who I was and embracing every part of myself, flaws, scars, and all. This was only the beginning of a new chapter, and I was ready to write it, one bold and hopeful step at a time.